Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at painting up some figures for a upcoming Panzer diorama. So I found these resin figures on eBay from a Chinese seller that I've used in the past. They are for German tank crew, the exact number that I need to crew the Panzer 38T model I have on my bench. First things first, removing the parts from the sprue gates. As these are resin, you need heavy-duty parting tools like a hobby saw and a knife. Sandpaper can help clean up the mold lines and get the parts to fit correctly. Remember that resin dust is very bad for your lungs, so please remember your PPE. Here are the 4 reclining figures. I kept the heads separate as they will need different painting techniques. The first thing we need to do is to pin the bodies and the heads to toothpicks for easier holding and drying and manipulating during the painting process. I use a micro drill to drill a hole placement that will be covered by the diorama placement of the figure, or it'll be covered up once the figure is fully assembled. Super glue is the only thing that will bond to resin and wood, and we'll clip the wood when finished and sand it down afterwards. So toothpicks are the way to go. I decided to prime the heads and bodies in Vallejo's Ghost Gray Surface Primer. As my white is acting a little funky these days, and I'm currently out of black primer. We'll start with the heads, and using that gray primer means that we can use less base coats and colors to get good coverage, but I will have to come back in and add some shading later on. We can also start with a medium flesh tone and not a brown undercoat, as we don't need to cover up the black. Still, use multiple thin layers. This allows for good coverage and no loss of details. After a third or fourth layer and an overnight dry, I was happy with the coverage and the tone of the skin. Now it's time to add some life to that flat skin tone. I took the burnt red from my face color collection and thinned it way down. I wanted a glaze-like consistency, and it is very easy to break the paint if you add too much water, so I added a few drops of flow improver, and this can help. Here's the consistency I'm looking for. The back of the hand trick is a good way to check that you have just enough that the pigments are going to just tint the skin color. The glaze was applied all over the flesh bits to act as a filter and a shade for the eyes, nose, and mouth. While the glaze dried, I mixed up several tones ranging from the original medium flesh tone to lighter and lighter progressions using pale flesh. These were then used to add back some highlights. Here you can see I used a fine brush to get the highlight where I wanted it on the raised surface, but then I came back in quickly with a small dry brush just to blend it back into the deeper areas. This makes for a smoother transition of the shade variations, but you have to move quickly with acrylics as they dry extremely quickly, especially when applied in such thin layers. Now comes the part that I wasn't sure was going to work for me. It's a new technique that I learned from my niece, who is a painter, 2D painter, and that is to use a dark blue instead of a dark black or brown when I want to add shadows to a face. I also used, and what I used it for was to give that 5 o'clock beard growth look. So I chose my darkest pure blue color, which is a Prussian blue, and I used a very fine pointed brush, and I just stippled the blue all over the face. Now, while this did give a nice illusion of beard growth, it looked too blue for me. So what I did is I took that blue, mixed in some of the light flesh tone that was still on the palette, and made a bluey gray color. And then I took this and thinned it down, not quite to a glaze consistency, but real close, and just kind of spread that over the blue stippling once that was completely dry. And in the end, I was quite surprised how well it worked. It really does now give the illusion of a beard starting. Hair, lips, and eyes were next. Satisfied with the heads, it was time to move on to the bodies. German panzer crews were all black uniforms in the early war years. I started with a mixture of German gray and just a touch of black. This was applied as a base coat using my airbrush to get a smooth, even overall application. So there isn't much color variation going on here, as this tank is set in the early days of the war, maybe uh, early Barbarossa time or possibly running into Poland. On my palette, I mixed up a variation of dark grays to light grays. I started with the standard German gray, which is a pretty dark gray, but not black. And then I made shade variations by adding different levels of neutral gray and ballast gray. The flesh tone in the picture is there just to touch up the hands and other flesh bits that I might get some black on. So what I did is I worked up from the darkest creases with that pure German gray and the folds of the cloth, and I worked up through a series of grays, much like I did on the faces, with a fine brush laying in and then blending with either a dry brush or the edge of that brush to get some contrast on the uniforms. Once that was complete, it was just a matter of touch-ups and adding some white and pink on the shoulder epaulets and picking out any individual details, like pure black for the binoculars and the leather straps, some dark brown for gun cases, any visible belts. The boots also were painted in a mixture of German gray and black to make them darker than the uniforms. And once I get the rest of the diorama built, I'll come back in and attach the four heads and add some weathering, like dirt splashes and scuffing up the boots. Just got to see how they fit together and what color I end up with on the base. So anyhow, that was a quick and dirty tour of how I painted up these four tankers for my upcoming project, a Panzer 38T. Until next time, happy hobbying.